Ah,
So I can record it now.
cool.
You know, I go away for 3 weeks and I don't know how anything works. You know, this is what happens when you get old. So don't laugh, you guys. It's right around the corner for you. Okay, my apologies, everybody. Really do. And so let's see. We'll go back to sharing screen. Here. So that, you know, throughout human history in every society, I think there was a recognition, as I mentioned earlier, that that people are sacred, that there's a dignity and beauty of people. But the problem was that it was always limited to, let's say, the aristocracy, or limited to the royal family, or limited to landholders, or limited to the masters, or limited to male or men. And so what we have throughout human history is the attempt to enlarge the circle of those who are dignified, worthy of respect, not a subcategory of human beings, but for all human beings. So from some, you see on the left side, to all. That's the goal. So that if you're crippled, you're not less of a human being, like a leopard who has to be marginalized down. That if you are a woman, you're not obviously less than a human being, that women are created equal. That if you are enslaved, whether because of financial reasons or the color of your skin, or because you lost the war, you're not less of a human being. And that because you're a different race, no Jews allowed from Nazi Germany, that you're not less of a human being. So that you see the value, dignity, that inner blue circle. The goal is to get that circle to be enlarged so that it's the same size, the same circle as the overall circle of human beings, from some to all. And this is what the UDHR did. The UDHR, by making it as inclusive as possible, meant that no human being could ever be excluded from the language of the rights that it conferred or recognized. So that there are two things that occurs. The UDHR did two things that were monumental. Number one, it delimited national sovereignty. What it meant was that a nation was not absolutely sovereign over its own people. But instead, the international committee, the international community can step into a nation and get involved in their national politics when the international community discerns that they're not treating their people with the level of respect and dignity that's called upon by the UDHR. So that, you know, I have Mugabe from Zimbabwe, and Kim Jong-un, North Korea, and Hussein from Iraq. But that these dictators do not have total power, that they must be answerable in principle to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so this is Farrar and Gar. Until World War II, most legal scholars and governments affirmed the general proposition, albeit not in so many words, that international law did not impede the natural right of each equal sovereign to be monstrous to his or her own subjects. What this meant was that the government can step in when the government of a nation mistreated its own people. And then the second thing it did was it declared the equality of all human rights. Now, I'm using this, the 3/5 compromise that occurred, and I'm sure many of you from high school U.S. history heard about this, but, you know, how should slaves be counted in America in terms of a number of purposes? So that in the South, they wanted the slaves to be counted one for one in terms of representation, the number of US representatives you sent to the House, but not in terms of taxation. But in the North, it was just the reverse. They didn't want the slaves to be counted in terms of representation, but to be counted in terms of taxation. So you got that 3/5 compromise. So that for every 5 white people, there are 5 votes, 5 that are counted. But for every 5 slaves, there were 3 that's counted. And this is a legal compromise, but it signified that those of color who were enslaved in certain times in American history weren't worth as much as a white person. So the UDHR signifies that every individual is fully human, that none are less than human. In fact, there's this really insightful quote from Richard Rorty. And so I'm going to read this a little bit slowly, but Richard Rorty says, Serbian murderers and rapists do not think of themselves as violating human rights. Well, how can they not be? Further, they are not doing these things to fellow human beings, but to Muslims, implying that Muslims are less than humans. So that when in the 1840s in America, when blacks were being enslaved, their human rights were not being violated because they weren't fully human. Therefore, they didn't have all the rights. This is how Richard Rorty says our thinking occurs. They are not being inhuman, but rather are discriminating between true humans and the pseudo-humans, those who appear human but are less than human. They are making the same sort of distinction as the Crusaders made between the humans and the infidel dogs, and the black Muslims make between humans and blue-eyed devils. In fact, in Nazi Germany, Jews were referred to as rats. Richard Rorty goes on to say that when we want to dehumanize a people group, we connect them to animals to make it easier to rob them of their human rights. Thomas Jefferson was able to own slaves and to think it self-evident that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. He had convinced himself that the consciousness of blacks, like that of animals, participates more of sensation than reflection. Excuse my language, but sort of like when my dog Boo Boo experiences pain, it's an emotional, physiological, but there's no deep mental or psychological pain. In fact, I was reading accounts of blacks who were being sold off after they were unloaded from these slave ships, and they would come and then families would be separated out, their parents, children, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters. And when they were separated out, they would show this emotional distress, and the white individuals who were doing the selling would make comments to the buyers like, they're not really experiencing pain like us. It's sort of like the pain that a dog or a horse would experience. It's the marginalization of humanity that allows the deprivation of their rights easier to swallow. Like the serfs, Mr. Jefferson did not think of himself as violating human rights. The serfs take themselves to be acting in the interest of true humanity by purifying the world of pseudo-humanity. And that will be the reasoning behind virtually all forms of genocide. And so when we look at the human rights, what we realize is that human rights is grounded in human dignity. This far, the UDHR makes very clear. There's something unique and sacred about the human person that enables them to be able to claim certain rights, such as right to bodily, not being raped or tortured, falsely imprisoned, and the right to life and to worship. Now, I'm going to go create an illustration. Human dignity is something about the human being that cannot be put on a price. It's not about functional value. Someone who has a higher IQ does not have more rights. Someone who is considered more beautiful or someone who's more talented or gifted do not have more rights than others. It's not functional. It's inherent. Now, I don't know if you heard of the Pinto case. So this is a Ford Pinto. And the Ford Pinto came out in the early 1970s because there were small compact cars that were being imported from Europe, and it was taking over the subcompact and compact market within America. And Ford wanted to put out a compact car that would dominate the market and compete against these European compact cars. And so what they did was, it usually took 4 years at that time period for Ford to put out a new car. So that's from on paper to end of production. But they squeezed it into 2 years. So they're rushing everything to get the Pinto out there to compete in the market. And because it was so rushed, one, Secondly, they wanted it cheap. So it was $2,000 when it came out. So $2,000 in 1970s dollar. So it was rushed and it was cheap. That what they realized in their production and when they were testing was that when it got rear-ended, it had a tendency of exploding. Now, that's not a good thing to have with any new car that you buy. When they did the testing and the cars got rear-ended, it exploded. Now, Ford knew this before the car was mass-produced. What they decided to do was still produce it and send it out, mass market into American society. And then one day, 3 teenagers were driving in their Ford Pinto and they got rear-ended by a truck and the thing exploded and they died a fiery death. It was in the newspapers. And what they realized was that Ford knew the tendency of these Pintos to explode when they got rear-ended. So when they asked them, how in the world did you make this decision? They said that they calculated. They did a cost-benefit analysis. And what they realized was that the Ford Pinto had put the gas tank in the back, in the rear. So as you can see in the diagram, it's in the rear so that when it got rear-ended, it had a tendency of exploding. And when they reconfigured these Pintos and put it away from the rear, it's safer, but it would also cost $11 to redesign the car and to reconfigure the production line. So it's $11 per car, and they decided that it was not worth it. How? Well, so if you look in the benefit side, they assumed that there would be about 180 deaths by burning, the car exploding, and then about 180 serious burn injuries, and then about 2,100 burned vehicles. And so what they did was they assigned price tags to those dying by burning, those who are injured in the cars. And so the total benefit, 180 times 200,000. So each life is worth like 200,000. And then each injury is like 67,000. And then the 2,100 for the car, $700. So what you have is $49.5 million in terms of putting it out there without making any changes. But if they did decide to make the change, you would have 11 million cars, 1.5 million light trucks, and then $11 per car to make the change, and it would come out to 147 million. So yeah, when you put that on the balance, you find that it's a lot easier to just leave the car as it is, produce it, send it out, and then take the hits as they come. But when this became public, the fact that Ford assigned $200,000 for each person just shocked everyone, because there's a sense in which the human being is so sacred that you can't put a price tag. Now, I understand that when you sue people or wrongful death, that you can put a functional value on a person. In other words, how much money would they earn in their lifetime to try to calculate. But nowhere would you think that the person themselves is worth $200,000. Ford had assigned a value to a human life, and that's the part which really, I think, caught the attention of the media and the society, because we're used to thinking that there's something unique and valuable about the human person, whereby we are priceless. And so Richard Perry writes, as the International Bill of Rights makes clear, then, the fundamental conviction at the heart of the morality of human rights is this: each and every born human being, each and every member of species, Homo sapiens, has inherent dignity. Therefore, no one should deny that any human being has, or treat any human being as if she lacks inherent dignity, not functional dignity, but inherent dignity. So now here's the apologetic question. Where does this dignity come from? Where does this dignity come from? We recognize the human rights, all 30 listed, are grounded in human dignity, but human dignity has to come from somewhere. Where is the source of this claim? Now, the UDHR does not answer this question. It's not found in the documents. because it would have created a level of controversy whereby you could not ratify it with the 57 or 58 initial United Nations members. And so they left it out. What we understand, though, so this is the central question. Now, this is Kurtz. Kurtz is a secular humanist, and he says the central question about moral and ethical principles concerns their ontological foundation. All morality about human persons is grounded in the uniqueness or sacredness of the human person. If they were neither derived from God nor anchored in some transcendent ground, are they purely ephemeral? See, this is the question he's asking as an atheist. If it's not from top down, then is it merely an illusion that we have created for ourselves in order for society to work? Because there's only two choices. It's from top down, from God. If the source is transcendent, the claim to dignity is grounded in a higher authority. But if it's eminent, if the source is eminent, sorry about the typos, if the source is eminent, by what authority can this claim of dignity be made? This is the problem. If you go top down, you have to have some kind of higher authority. But if you go bottom up, you don't have any authority by which to declare that each human being is dignified. And so this is the question that we ask. So if it's top down, it would be like the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. One of the primary functions of governments is to protect human rights. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to rebel, to alter, to abolish it. And so either it's top down or it's bottom up, the theory of evolution, which experiences a level of difficulty because the theory of evolution, there's no real gap between species. There's a level of continuity. And so what we want to do here is next week, I want to look at the theory of evolution, both in terms of the nature of the human person and then the call to recognize the rights of that person. So there's two things here. The nature of the person, that's the metaphysical question. And then the call to recognize their rights, that's the justice question or the morality question. And to demonstrate that it's the Christian worldview that best accounts for human rights grounded in human dignity, not the theory of evolution. And in fact, Eleanor Roosevelt and then the 18 committee members, the 18 committee nations that got together, they created a subcommittee of 4 individuals plus Eleanor Roosevelt to actually write the document, and then the 18 nations worked on it, reworded it, and then sent it to the 57, 58 United Nations. But among the 4, Eleanor Roosevelt and the 4 writing committee, 4 of the 5 were Christians. The document reflects a Christian worldview. That's why it connects so well. But if you reject Christianity or reject theism, then you have a problem because the theory of evolution doesn't seem to be able to account for the language of human rights, of which we use everywhere today. And so what I want to argue next week is not that this is a knockdown argument against evolution, but that if you hold on to the theory of evolution, naturalistic evolution, and hold on to the concept of human dignity that grounds human rights, then you're going to have a tension in your worldview. It's going to be very difficult to resolve. And in fact, those who recognize this problem do not talk about inherent human dignity and human rights anymore. They talk about functional, because that's the only way to go. If you believe in the theory of evolution, you have to go functional. And as soon as you go functional, you're going to have 2 problems. Number one, some will be excluded. And functionality, you're going to always have a qualitative difference. And that goes against the spirit of the UDHR. So it's 11:51, and I don't know if you have questions or comments, but we can talk if you like, or save it for next week when I actually evaluate the Christian worldview, and then the theory of evolution in the light of human dignity, human rights. Are there any comments or thoughts? I'll give it a minute, and if not, that's wonderful too. You know, we'll.
Hi, Pastor. Can you hear me?
Is this Matteo?
Yes, this is Matteo. Sorry.
Hey, Matteo.
Yeah. So I'm in Home Depot. I was
You're
listening
to.
Yes,
that's wonderful.
Right. I was listening from my phone.
What are you doing at Home Depot?
Well, I'm looking for an air pump, but it's very hard to find.
An air pump, okay.
That's another set of problems. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Hey, what's up, Matteo?
Yeah. So no, I have questions, but as usual, I'm happy to go last.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there anyone else with thoughts or questions or comments? I know this is just an introduction, and it's pretty straightforward, the concepts that I presented. As long as you understand that human rights is grounded in human dignity, and that this is the dominant way of talking about international politics, economics, civil rights, justice, LGBTQ community, it's all about rights. So it has permeated our society, but no one really asks where are these rights coming from, and that's the apologetic value of this conversation.
Can you define again functional human rights?
Yeah, in contrast to inherent human rights, it's the fact that you belong to the human species, that you are a member of a particular classification. So as long as you're human, you have human rights inherently. It belongs to you. It can never be taken away, and it can never be lessened, less rights. But if it's functional, which next week you'll see, the number one functional criteria for human rights is intelligence, cognitive, self-awareness, or cognitive ability. There, you can exclude certain individuals, right? Those who are in vegetative states, or those who are suffering from Alzheimer's, have no more cognitive function. You can be excluded, as well as fetuses. This is a huge argument in the pro-life debate, right? So if you're fetus before experiencing sensations of pain, then after 6 months or whatever. And so you can exclude certain individuals that do not display the function. And then secondly, you have levels of quality, so that you can have certain individuals who have a high IQ, let's say a high functioning of intelligence as defined by, let's say, IQ or Western world, and then others who have less functionability. So this would be perhaps those who are struggling from mental handicaps or lower IQ types of individuals. Then what do? Do they have high function individuals have more, while low functioning have less? So you can have qualitative differences. And so you get into trouble. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But inherent human rights, as long as you are a member of the human family, you automatically have the same number and the same level. Those are the two important things. And that's what the UDHR is trying to do. If you look at the preamble and the articles, it's trying to include every single human being on the same level. That's what it's trying to do, the UDHR. Now you can reject the UDHR. You can reject the UDHR and then go where you want to go in terms of your worldview. But the problem is that our world is so embedded in the language of UDHR, human rights, that it's extremely hard to divorce yourself from the UDHR. So what I want to do is create a wedge and say, look, you got to pick and choose, right? As a Christian, I don't have to pick and choose. But if I hold on to a naturalistic theory of evolution, at least there's tension. At least there's tension. And that's what I want to explore and expose next week.
And I think because as you were talking, I was going through the UN Charter. It says on Article 38, it aims to have unity without prejudice. Right. In Article 38.
Right. Yeah. The brotherhood of men. That includes.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say, but I had to craft my words carefully.
Yes. And you're a wise person for doing that. That we have one source of origination from God. Yeah. Anyone else before Matteo? And I'm going to end this at 12:15. So, and those of you who need to go and have lunch or do other things, please be free. This is just, I mean, the lecture part kind of is over, although the Q&A part is probably more engaging than the actual lecture. Matteo, I think you're free to go. While you're at Home Depot.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks for the lecture. I think it was interesting, and it has lots of connection to many things. So I will start with one question, which I think it's the most important. So if you take God as the ground of rights, then this seems more or less a repetition of that move. You say you cannot have absolute moral values if you don't believe that God grounds morality. So I see a problem with this type of argument. Two problems. One, I don't think it's biblical, and I think, and two, I don't think it's philosophically sound, because how do you know? How do you know that what God does is good, unless you take a completely arbitrary definition of morality or rights? If God decides that to rape a child for fun is good, then that is really good.
Right.
I wouldn't follow you down that route.
Are you talking about the Euthyphro dilemma?
Yes.
Right. So let me
essentially, yes.
For today, all I'm doing is connecting human rights to human dignity and asking the question, where's it coming from? That's all I want to do today. There is a section on our schedule where I talk about the theistic grounding of morality, where the Euthyphro dilemma is more applicable in that section.
So, but do you think that, for example, if I see a picture, a painting from Michelangelo, and I say it's beautiful, do you think I cannot be a naturalist and take that to express an objective truth? I should be a theist, because otherwise, how do you really know it's beautiful? I don't see how putting God into the picture helps.
Okay.
That was just an analogy with aesthetic judgment.
Right, and I would pursue the same argument there, that if I come across a painting that's beautiful or a landscape that's considered beautiful, that there's a subjective, objective dimension to the recognition of that beauty. And I would argue that naturalism would have an extremely difficult time accounting for why certain configurations of matter should be exalted or elevated or produce certain phenomena within us than other states of matter. Because I would think that there's a level of subjectivity to beauty, but it's also objective as well. It's the subjective objective dimension to it. And so I can apply that to human beings, but I think I can also apply it to paintings, landscape, melody and music, and the beauty of like the prodigal son, the father that is waiting for the son to return. I'm not sure I'm convinced by evolutionary explanations of beauty, which is survival value. I find certain landscapes valuable because I'm more prone to find food there. I'm not quite sure. No, I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying I don't find that very convincing.
Yeah. I don't think a naturalist is committed to that aesthetic theory. But let's. I try to shift. So if you want to talk about the beautiful problem another time, we can do that. So I try to shift to ask a question from the biblical perspective. So the Bible presents as a discovery that God is good, not as something analytic or something logic, something that logic teaches us, or anything like this. It's an empirical discovery.
Agreed.
So that would not make sense if God could have been immoral. God could have not been immoral. So I don't think it's compatible with the Bible to say that God is the ground of morality if the Bible allows God to be immoral. You need an external way to judge that God is moral, and then you empirically discover is such.
But you're going to have the third man problem with Aristotle. Who's going to gauge the standard? You need a standard for the standard. You're going to have an infinite regress as well.
Well, there may be another problem for my things, but that still wouldn't save your theory. But I don't think it's a problem for my theory. But my point now is only that it wouldn't save your theory.
So let me flip it and say, Matteo, do you have an ultimate grounding for goodness yourself?
I don't know.
Well, you can't. Can you just give me that? There is no ultimate grounding for goodness which is not intuitively embraced. There's no other way. I mean, for platonic forms, right? The form of beauty, the form of good, form of truth. Well, the beauty being its the encapsulation. There's nothing behind beauty to demonstrate that the form of beauty is beautiful. At some point, you have to stop at an ultimate end, the form of beauty, by which we recognize that babies are beautiful, roses are beautiful. There is no way to get behind the ultimate. And so the question isn't, is there something behind the ultimate? The question is, which ultimate do you embrace? And so for me, I embrace the God of the Bible with its difficulties of interpretation, but I can't go behind God and evaluate God, just like I can't go behind the form of beauty and find another higher form to evaluate beauty. Because then you're going to ask who's going to evaluate the form that's behind. You see the infinite regress?
Yes, I'm not, if I understand that, I'm not sure I take it as a dichotomy that either you do one thing or the other, or if you do go the Platonic way, you have problems. But I want to stay focused on my things. I don't think it's biblical to say that God is the ground of morality, because the Bible presents the people as having somehow some independent grasp of morality, imperfect as it may be, and perfectible and as it may be, and then using the somehow validity that this confers to moral judgments to discover that God is good.
You're arguing that's circular?
No, I'm arguing that it's incompatible with the theory that God is the ground of morality.
Matteo, if I may.
Yes.
Okay, so when you get home, I would encourage you to meditate on Romans 12:16, which says, "Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the holy. Never be wise in your own sight." So what that says to me is, in regards to your question, if God is a God of morality, we're supposed to be united as brother and sister, regardless if we're white, black, Korean, or whatever else. So that's my thoughts.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thanks.
But, dialogue. Does anyone else want to contribute and dialogue back and forth? I'm
sorry for taking away from you, Pastor.
Oh, no. Not from me. I wish we were all in the same room. That'd be great. I'm still struggling a little bit, Matteo. How it's not. So let me. What if the recognition of morality by each individual is from a conscience that God has placed in their heart? Would that solve the issue? So that you have the source. Would that work?
Yes, but that still doesn't mean that God must be moral analytically. It doesn't make the proposition that God is moral analytical. So that's where I have problems.
Yeah,
still,
I don't have a problem. Well, I'm not sure I want to go. You're using analytical in terms of the Kantian synthetic analytic.
Yeah, so it's not a conceptual truth, it's
Right.
a empirical truth. And so you can have moral judgments even before or even without believing that there's God or God is moral,
Oh,
and
I
so
see.
on, if you can. And
Right.
these judgments have at least a decent degree of validity, perfectible, I'm
Right.
sure. But
Well, what if in my Christian worldview, I believe that God created every human being with a level of conscience that reflects basic moral principles, and I have a Bible passage for that, then you don't have to recognize God, but still recognize the morality of God. That's why I believe Romans 1 says God can judge people because they knew in their hearts. Then you could have morality of God without recognizing God himself. Wouldn't that solve the problem to some degree?
I don't have problem with that idea, but I just don't think it makes it. So my point is only that one does not need to appeal to God to make moral judgments, to recognize human rights and so on. It's not something complete. It's not
I
something
agree.
compatible with evolution either, because you may have a theistic evolution.
But I agree on the epistemic level, not on a metaphysical level. Right? People who don't believe in God, they use language of human rights all the time and the language of human dignity. My question is, where's their source of it in their worldview? It's a grounding issue, not a recognition issue.
Right? Yeah.
Unless you're able to ground human dignity within the theory of evolution, I'm not sure how naturalists can meaningfully use the language of human rights. They can use it, they do, but they just don't have a grounding. And that's the grounding problem that I'm trying to expose.
Well, you may think that it's a conceptual truth that humans have this type of rights, which would be the I'm not started quoting now. It's not the place, but would be the position of several people. But so, do you think that without God, if there's no God, there's no ground about the truth that 0 is equal to 0?
0 is equal to 0?
Yeah, something like this. So I want to say, I'm afraid that if one follow your reasoning, then you have to put God as the ground even of mathematical truth, logical truth.
Oh, no.
Can't you just recognize as something is true as a matter of fact, or
But
conceptually?
your matter of fact truth, human rights, is grounded in the dignity of the human person. That matter of truth, then you can ask, where does that come from? I'm not saying you can't have truth apart from God. I'm just saying in this instance, when you say human beings are unique from all other animals in such a way that it has certain rights that animals do not, you have a continuity issue here. And the theory of evolution is a theory of continuity, whether it's punctuated equilibrium or progressive small changes. You have a continuity is the hallmark of theory of evolution. You have any gap that's too big, and that's sort of like a miracle. And when you have continuity, I just don't know how you have uniqueness of the human person. So do it this way, Matteo. It's not just if I don't have God, can I have human rights? Go the other direction. If I only have theory of evolution, can I have human rights?
I think you can.
Well, then save that for next week, because we're heading into next week now. Yeah. And let me know how you're going to respond so I can work on it. Can you wait till next week on that one?
Absolutely, yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Because all I want to do today is human rights language is everywhere. It's grounded in human dignity. Human dignity has to come from somewhere. That's all I wanted to do today. And then next week we can talk more about whether evolution is a feasible grounds for the UDHR. Yeah.
Can I have another question if nobody wants to jump in?
We have 3 minutes. Yes, 3 minutes.
So the other problem I ask you to discuss is whether this move of going to God resemble too closely the problems of the God of the gaps. So that when I arrive at a point where I feel I need more explanation and I don't find it in other ways, I say that's God.
Right.
That's a problem in two senses. One is that maybe there's more to say that we haven't, alternative to say that we haven't discovered. And the second is that where is God from, or where is that power of God from, right? And then usually people just respond, it's a mystery, or just by definition God can do that. So anyway, the answer becomes a little more than just saying God is a word I can use everywhere, and there's no way to test that. There's no way to falsify what I say about that. And so it's a bit, it's epistemically lazy, and for me that makes it not an option to use.
That charge you just made about God, I could make about any worldview. Platonic forms, state of matter, parallel universes. At some point, you have to have a brute fact. Without that, you have an infinite regress. So I could ask, where did the Platonic forms come from? Where did matter come from? Where did parallel universes come from? Unless you have a starting point, you have an infinite regress. So I don't think it's epistemic laziness. I think it's epistemic humility to recognize that there's an ultimate brute starting point, whether we call it God, matter, energy, or whatever. But let me briefly God of the gaps, just very briefly on that one. If I can never have God intervening in a gap, then by default, I will never have God involved in my world. And there's at least one place where I have to have a gap at one place, at least one place. And that's the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I cannot leave that to naturalistic means. I don't know how I could. There has to be a God of the gaps in the theory of resurrection of Jesus Christ, at least for me. And so if I have one, then I can start working with that for other areas where I think it's required. And you can disagree with me, and that's the beauty of these Bible studies, is that you can disagree. I just want to make sure I understand you correctly. But you do see how if you never have a God of the gap, you will have to have deism by default, right? As a philosophical assumption.
You said if you don't have a God of the gaps, you cannot be a theist.
Yeah, if you can never have God intervening in a gap, then you're going to have some form of deism, I think. Right? God never being involved.
Well, I don't.
Let's think about it. It's 12:15, and I got to go as well. Save some of your questions for naturalism and human dignity for next week, because next week is part 2. We'll pick it up from there. Can we
Thank
do
you.
that? Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for getting from Home Depot.
Right.
Thank you for everyone for participating and staying and the discussion. And we'll pick this up next week with the Christian worldview and the theory of evolution and its attempt to account for human rights. Okay. And then, by the way, next week at 2 o'clock is a congregational meeting. So please keep that in mind and register in order for you to vote. Okay. Enjoy your lunch and then keep cool today. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.